So without further ado, let me introduce our today's speakers. We have our colleague Grace Zhu, who is connecting at this very late hour from Tianjin in China. This is where we have our branch office since 2014. Hi, Grace, can you hear us? Great. If we can test your audio just very quickly.
Yes, of course. And hello, everyone. Glad to join us today.
Excellent. So Grace serves in her role as our China branch manager. She's well versed in Chinese education market with many years of experience advising and assisting our clients there through research and research-driven student recruitment solutions. Secondly, it will be myself. My name is Igor Skibickij. I work in the capacity of BONARD's Chief Operations Officer. I'm based out of Slovakia, Central Europe. However, I have spent my previous 7 years in China in the capacity of our China branch manager between 2012 and 2018, before Grace effectively succeeded me in this role in the remit. So we both work for BONARD. BONARD is a market research and recruitment solutions consultancy in international education. On the side of research work, we provide a range of research services, either annual research in the form of subscription for educators to provide sort of constant flow of data and advisory solutions to inform their strategies, or it is ad hoc research, which can be related to market reports, market strategies, competitors, price benchmarks, product research, and whichever helps sort of navigate recruitment efforts. On the side of recruitment solutions, we focus on identifying quality partners. For some, it may be agents. For others, it may be schools or other educational institutions in the source markets. And we mostly facilitate in-person, either virtual or one-on-one meetings with these select stakeholders in order to sort of drive recruitment efforts of educators. We are not a study abroad consultancy nor agency. We're not an aggregator or edtech. You can think of us rather as an independent B2B research consultancy. For today's topic, we have those of you who follow our market intelligence webinars in China, and you know that we frequently bring content from the market. We wanted to do this special topic regarding the recent new changes that occurred in China, especially around the pandemic regulations as well as educational regulations. So on the side of regulating overseas online-based programs. We would like to look at what it effectively means for Chinese students, for agents or partners in China, educators as well, here present, and service providers. So our intention today is to give you sort of a balanced view, how to interpret these regulations and changes, how they impact students and parents' opinions, and how you can make adjustments based on those, whether it's your programs, your communication strategies, perhaps recruitment activities in the market, in order for you to stay sort of with the right and timely approach within the market. So I would start with sort of the trends on especially the COVID prevention policy. So firstly, based on the latest regulations, the Chinese health authorities have recently relaxed COVID-19 quarantine measures in China, particularly on January 8th, 2023 this year. Effectively, it means that COVID is now classified as sort of less serious disease, equivalent to seasonal flu, let's say, or other common diseases in China. For such densely populated country with second largest population in the world, it is sensitive and very sort of big reform and policy shift over the last 3 years. Basically, the authorities are signaling to the outside world they have managed the pandemic. It's no longer posing national level threat. They have sufficient medical capabilities to sort of deal with any sparks in cases or COVID waves during seasons, and that China is open for business. If the business means international education, tourism, travel, inbound and outbound mobility, all of that falls within this category. The sort of most practical adjustments that have occurred as a result of these regulatory changes are that mandatory quarantines are no longer required upon arrival. Only the test requirements are still in place and they need to be demonstrated upon arrival. However, the lengthy quarantine periods in hotels are no longer necessary. The quotas on international flights have been lifted. So there is now, the flights are now available to operate sort of several routes and several flights instead of the one per week previously. And also the quotas on the passengers have been lifted. The visa issuance rate has resumed for visitors, business, work purposes, study, family, transit visas to China. So the embassies, Chinese embassies and consulates around the world are again issuing permits to travel to China. And most importantly, the resumption of passports, issuance of passports and immigration clearance for Chinese travelers outbound are now occurring again, which is a very positive sign towards recovery of tourism and study abroad mobility. We wanted to understand and sort of have a look if these recent sort of regulations already have a certain impact on the availability and cost of flights. So we did a little survey on that, and I'll tell you about it. But before, we have a couple of poll questions that we would like to share as always. So if my colleagues could bring it up for your vote on the screen, and it's related to your plans of traveling to China in 2023. It would be very interesting to know for us if you are already in any stages of planning to go to China this year, given these recent regulations. So when it comes to this little flights research that we have done, cost research, and this is for your benefit so that you have a rough idea, what are the average costs of travel to China? We looked at a number of flight connections, around 300 connections from major hubs in Europe, Australia, North America to major cities in China. And we wanted to see what's the average costs. The positive news is that flights are increasingly available and affordable. So you will find that the median prices for flights, especially of those most cost affordable destinations, they are in the ballpark of $800 to $1,200. However, we noticed that there are considerable price differences currently that are between Australia and Europe, which are on the more cost affordable side of the spectrum, and then North America, which are still relatively expensive compared to pre-pandemic levels, as you can see on those averages. So like for instance, for US, the cheapest flights we could find were from New York to Shanghai for roughly $1,700 return, or from Canada, it was Vancouver and Montreal to Shanghai at roughly $1,800. So it's almost double the cost of average flights from Europe or Australia. So there is still inequality, and some airlines and the routes were able to catch up faster, some not yet. However, we can probably expect that the prices will further decrease with the upcoming summer travel period, which is always heavy for tourism, and later September start dates for the students. That should encourage airlines to compete more, and it should put pressure on the prices to decrease, especially from the from the Western Hemisphere at the moment. By the way, this research was on a sample of flight 9 weeks from now, in order to plan travel and agenda in advance, staying 2 weeks in China, traveling from Saturday to Saturday to maximize the business dates, and to major hubs and from major hubs. So that's how it looks on the price side at the moment, and how these regulations sort of translate into the practical terms. When it comes to recent educational reforms, those you probably have witnessed as well over the media. So Chinese authorities will effectively cease to provide accreditation services for foreign diplomas earned by distance learning as of spring 2023 semester or autumn semester in the Southern Hemisphere equivalent. Certain exceptions may remain for students who are not able to travel overseas, and they will need to sort of prove their case with valid documents in place. However, the regulation is firm and in place, and effectively Chinese authorities are saying that pandemic is no longer an obstacle, or should no longer constitute an obstacle for Chinese students to earn a valid overseas diploma. By valid overseas diploma, they particularly mean studies undertaken in person. We have witnessed that the pandemic period in China, it has brought a lot of sort of online-based solutions, whether it was higher education or language study. So the whole sector tried to adapt. Chinese students had let's say, a meaningful replacement over this period of time. Educators, on the other hand, were able to retain sort of certain recruitment quotas and revenues associated with it. However, this period seems to be definitely over, and the need to return to in-class-based delivery methods or significant proportion of class-based delivery education is again required for Chinese students and for educators to adapt to this situation, so the Chinese students who are returning back to China can effectively apply for accreditation of their overseas earned diplomas in order to be recognized in domestic markets. So whether it would be employers or academic institutions, it is now a new prerequisite. So it certainly puts a lot of question marks for online-based or online-driven educators who have sort of expanded their programs in China and have seen their numbers grow, and now they either need to switch back or sort of look for other creative ways how to retain the students. There is another shift going on at the same time, which is connected to this reform, and that is the impetus on vocational education. So as you will notice, in 2022, new vocational education laws were put into effect, which now sort of establish vocational education at the level of post-secondary education, so equalizing them and creating, say, a similar level of importance. And it's a shift by the authorities to stimulate the vocational sector in China, because it has been so heavily driven towards higher education. And it is no wonder, because if Chinese students go abroad and they spend money, resources, time, separation from families, dealing with sort of stress of being in new culture and destination, they want to earn a higher degree, diploma. They don't necessarily consider vocational study a success overseas. And that is why, despite these regulations, the market is still remaining very resilient and very focused on higher education. And we can probably expect more regulation in vocational sector or more stimulus in vocational sector in China, but more maybe certain incentives for overseas vocational providers as well. So this is ongoing. Some of the changes that occurred, whether it has sparked a certain uptick in admissions or applications, Yes, we have seen cases where immediately it has caused uptick in student numbers to Australia, to UK, US, in numbers for the intake dates. However, many Chinese students still remain in China. There are other challenges that are associated with logistics. So the backlog of visa approval times and applications, the shortage of international flights, lack of available accommodation, which has been a general problem almost in every destination. They are sort of the new problems for Chinese students to face following this regulation. And it appears the sector is not entirely prepared yet to accommodate the sudden need of Chinese students to return. So these changes will continue to take effect. It's still very early to say what sort of effect they have on the availability, but we did some survey and some research, especially into students and parent preferences that Grace will talk about very soon. How it reflects on the recovery levels, and if it reflects on the recovery levels, China is a quite resilient market. For the past decade, before COVID, it has grown from 284 to 700,000 students. So it tripled the outbound student population. Even during the pandemic, it remained the #1 source market for all the major destinations, except for Canada in 2021, when it was superseded by India. And it continues to be so. So we see activity in domestic universities in China who are resuming their partnerships and their outbound-based programs with overseas partners, and the numbers are returning to pre-pandemic levels. So there is positive activity already within the market that is associated with these changes. However, it probably still will take some time for it to fully materialize and be measurable on the annual sort of student numbers. The other things that are ongoing in the market is that, for example, the pathway programs, they seem to be on decline in recent years, starting in pre-pandemic, and the pandemic has actually caused a compression effect. So Chinese students are looking for either more cost-efficient or time-efficient study options overseas. Pathways do no longer seem to be represent that kind of strong ROI as it used to be when they had longer time for study or budgets. Now, many of them have postponed their study years, so they need to get their education faster. And we see this trend sort of happening in the market. Meanwhile, domestic English education supply has increased even through the recent 3 years. Many of providers have invested in the market and established robust English tuition capabilities in the market. So all these should inevitably stimulate further demand for study abroad. On the survey by JJL agency, as you can see, the age gaps for study abroad still remain very undergraduate to graduate focused. And that sort of underscores that China remains a very higher education oriented market. A little bit about employment. So the employment in China, or the unemployment rate in China in 22 was at 5.5%. Even though it has decreased as the sort of measures started to relax, we can see that the unemployment rate, especially for the young people, has increased, especially for the overseas returning students. The rate has increased about 8.6%. So it's becoming more and more competitive for Chinese graduates coming back to secure employment prospects and becoming more competitive. The local authorities are trying to respond to this situation by providing various incentives, especially in major cities. So cities like Beijing, Chengdu, Shanghai, Hangzhou, they are starting to offer incentives on the level of residency permits. So approval to reside in the particular city, to have social insurance there, to have accessibility to medical care, to kindergarten, schools. That's really important, especially in these big cities where the density of population is high. So now there are certain policies in place that incentivize overseas students in this regard, or they can offer a stipend or certain financial contribution to sort of set up upon returning back to China, or tax holidays, social insurance holidays. This drives demand from returning students to settle down in the cities and compete in their respective job markets. So it's creating certain inequality, driving urbanization to the top cities. And on the other hand, if you look at it, it is also causing a certain, or it is further reinforcing the need to remain ranking driven, because mostly these incentives are for the students who have completed, let's say, schools that are within top 50 or within top 100 world rankings. And therefore it will sort of reinforce students' decisions to pursue these schools as long as they can. On the geopolitical side of things, obviously we will not discuss politics here today. We are rather, as researchers, we are independent observers of the developments, and we study the effect on the mobility, but the relations with the 4 major study abroad destinations, they are diverse. When it comes to US-China relations, they have cooled over the recent years. Rhetorics has been strong, and obviously it does reach the mainstream media, and it creates question marks for students and parents regarding US as study destination. But it's still, Chinese students are still very pragmatic. For them, US still represents one of the top markets in terms of quality. So there is a reasonable level of resilience despite the stronger rhetorics going on. With Australia, it's rather pragmatic and focused on tourism recovery. So there have been high state official level visits from both countries, promoting joint tourism activities and return recovery of tourism, which contributes study abroad as well. When it comes to UK and China, the relations are quite pragmatic in many fields, probably the warmest of the 4. And the special focus is especially on the joint research and scientific cooperation between the destination, which positively encourages students, especially in the postgraduate sector. And with Canada, we could say there are diplomatic obstacles that need to be overcome in the coming years. So similarly to the US, it's not the warmest relationship at the moment. However, there have been state-level visits and meetings, either on the global fora or individually, and we will sort of monitor how these relations affect the study abroad situation. So when it comes to overall student mobility trends and their result of all these recent changes, whether it's regulations, in education, in health and safety, travel, geopolitics, we wondered what is the effect and what do the student numbers say. Obviously, it's probably still too early to predict. However, we note some of the ongoing trends, like numbers to US have been declining already since 2020 when they reached the peak. On the other hand, numbers to the UK have been steadily growing even throughout the pandemic, and it's probably a trend that will continue to manifest. And Canada, Australia are on moderate decline, even though Australia sees a certain recovery in student numbers. So it will be interesting to see how the 2022 numbers shape up, given what's been happening, and especially in 2023. Another interesting fact is that if you look at the total number of Chinese students studying abroad, it's almost equivalent number of Chinese students that have returned in 2022, over 1 million students. And those are all job seekers that need to have that want to find a quality work for the effort that they took overseas. And that's another important fact to reflect in sort of offering programs to Chinese students. When it comes to K-12, the numbers have dropped much more significantly over the years, obviously, as compared to higher education, where online programs could be a meaningful replacement. It was much more difficult to achieve, and the travel regulations combined, the numbers have dropped anywhere between 50 to 70% for respective destinations. So a recovery is anticipated now, and for K-12 program providers, this may be a good time to sort of recover activities in the market, because juniors should be able to travel again, or the K-12 age students should be able to travel in the company of parents to the destinations. For the ELT, it was the most significant decline over the years. So ELT numbers are down 74% between 2019 2021. And this is still something that needs to be seen how it will recover, given the sort of changes and the shifts in the economy, in the offering of online programs in China. But again, the recent regulations should positively contribute to resumption of ELT student mobility, even though we know that ELT student mobility from China was always very higher education driven, so students on academic programs and pathways. So this would be sort of the macro perspective, and perhaps at this point, I will give it over to Grace, and we can also show the results from the first poll questions. We should have enough answers right now. So interesting. The plans are underway for 29%, so for 1/3. Another third remains yet undecided, monitoring the situation. And roughly a third of responders does not yet have plans to travel to China, either not the focus or not the budget, or have a local representative. Okay. Grace, would you carry on from this part?
Of course. Well, thank you, Igor, for the market trend updates. We all understand that the China market has shifted in many ways in the past several months, ever since the new COVID prevention policy released and also the border reopened. But how those new policies affect the consumer market, and what's the students and the parents' reactions in terms of that? To better understand the customer end, we have conducted a survey on students and parents who intended to study abroad or send their kids abroad. And we would like to show the results and also key findings today. Many who are attending our today's webinar probably knew that we conducted a similar survey on last November. However, as you all know, things changed extremely fast ever since then. So we designed another survey earlier last month to find out if there's any changes on study abroad performance in both higher education and also K-12 sectors. And most importantly, what overseas institutions need to do to re-enter the market. Our survey was targeting both students and parents groups, where students are from high school and also universities, and parents are with kids in elementary and also middle schools. They all distributed evenly in all grades in each education level with no preference. At the same time, we also considered geographical distribution from tier 1 to other tier cities. Overall, we interviewed 350 students and 350 parents. Here we also listed the details of students' age, education level, and the city distribution. As the parents are always the key decision makers for K-12 sector, so we reach out to parents with children under 16 years old. The education level is even distributed in each grade and representing the potential overseas planning for elementary school all the way to master degree programs. In the following slides, the students' answers will reflect the higher education sector, and meanwhile, the parents' answers will reflect the K-12 sector. Let's take a look at the first questions. When interview the students, the first thing that we would like to know is that if the new domestic policy about the COVID prevention have any impact on their study abroad plans. On this pie chart over here, that we can see that around 1/3 of the students said that the policies indeed affected their plan, where they didn't plan to study abroad before, but they do now. And in addition, we asked this group of students who would like to study abroad right now, and we asked them which destinations they considering studying right now. And we can see the UK is currently the most popular one among all. And besides UK, the differences of Canada, Australia, US, and even France are not that big. And below, we also listed the results from our last November survey as comparison, and we can see demand for Australia gradually flattens, and the non-traditional English-speaking destinations do not have the advantage anymore. And the current trend is favored to the traditional ones. When it comes to the K-12 sector, we can see the parents who plan to send their kids abroad after the new policy released are slightly higher, and the ratio is 42%. Well, since the parents are normally more concerned about the situation. As for the destinations preference among the group of the parents, and we can see the top popularity ones are similar with the higher education. Well, however, over here in K-12 sector, Singapore is slightly more popular than the European destinations. Well, below, similarly, we also can take a look on the last November's result. And the traditional English-speaking destinations have always dominated the K-12 update. And there isn't obvious changes since the sector has always been relatively stable. Well, besides the popularity of the destinations, we can also take a step further and find out what's the main attractiveness of each destination. Well, again, we can start with the higher education sector. It's obvious that when students choosing a destination, they would definitely consider the quality of the education. Well, besides that factor, for each destination, and students will also consider other aspects. And here we also mark the ones that deserve noticing. And for example, in US, despite that we have seen the decline of the demand, but students still consider it as a popular destination, and the majority would choose it for the English improvement. And meanwhile, besides the education quality, students who prefer UK and also Canada would also consider its culture, safety, and environment. When it comes to Australia and New Zealand, the racial gap between various factors is not that large. And what's to mention over here is that agencies' recommendation is among the top reasons for Australia and New Zealand. And I believe many agencies would also consider the current market trend, the demand, and also they would recommend Australia to their students due to multiple beneficial factors for Chinese students. Well, as for Asia and also Europe, students also would mainly consider the environmental reasons. Moving on to the K-12 sector, quality of the education stands out among all the others in US. And at the same time, parents would be less concerned if they have relatives or friends over there to take care of their kids. And students for higher education programs would always prefer US for the English improvement. But over here, we can see the parents would rather choose UK and Canada for their kids instead. Well, other than that, actually the factors are quite similar with higher ed, and they are in line with the public understanding. Well, so overall, knowing the key reasons for the popularity of each destinations, institutions actually could increase the publicity for the main factors and also emphasize the advantages of its own, so to be better in line with the demand. Before we moving on, let's bring the second questions over here. So have you experienced an increase in the number of inquiries from Chinese students after recent changes? Well, we'll take a look of the results in a couple of minutes. Well, let's continue. In addition to the, well, ever since the pandemic, we have already clearly seen that the economic changes and also their impact on our daily life, either in China or in other markets. And many people are considering whether this study abroad market will also be impacted by that, and whether the range of the acceptable budget for students would change. So here we also ask the questions of the annual tuition fee. We can see for both higher education and also the K-12 sectors, the distribution is rather the same, and the majority would accept the budget among 23 to 36,000 US dollar annually. And I think we can take a look at the result of the question. If my colleague can bring out the result. And we can see majority didn't see the obvious changes yet, but I'm really glad that also over 40% already seen the increase of the students, and and even 30% consider the increase, and it increased greatly. And I believe more institutions would also see the similar trends from China market. And we can continue. Besides the budget range, and we also think it's really important to find out the budget level, if it's changed, and to compare with the pre-pandemic. And the good news for the educators is that more than half in both sectors don't feel the obvious changes, and the level is still the same as before. And of course, there are some consider that budget is slightly lower than pre-pandemic level, and the ratio is a bit higher than those who consider the range slightly higher. And for both sectors, and we can see the ratio is almost exactly the same. And when designing the program duration levels, institutions could also take it into consideration and probably price the programs in these segments. After choosing the preferred destinations, students and parents would also research the most suitable university and also the schools in multiple channels. And in addition to students, their own language preference and also the academic level, many other reasons are quite important as well. And here we can see for higher education sector, about 85% of the students mentioned this following top 5 reasons: the ranking of the university, the ranking of the majors, the security of the campus and the cities, the employability of graduates, and the academic quality of the universities. And of course, we all know that currently China is still a ranking-oriented market. However, here we can see the most stand out among all is actually the education quality, which institutions should also emphasize and focus on. In addition, on the right side, we also list out other mentioned regions and also their percentage rankings for references. Below, as for the K-12 sector, parents, they normally would consider more aspects for their kids. And over here, the top 5 reasons were mentioned by nearly all interviewed parents. And besides the education quality, parents also would consider about the school's reputation, the campus size, and also the security, of course. And I believe the K-12 institutions can also focus on market promotion in these parts. We also asked about the current concerns of the pandemic. Actually, from our understanding and our talk with students and agencies in recent years, higher educations or long-term programs are generally not affected by the pandemic. But other factors such as the flight options, which caused by the pandemic or other reasons, would have a greater impact on students' travel. And for K-12, of course, as mentioned before, the parents would also have more concerns. But in our communication with students last year, we found out the most of the primary concern about studying abroad or sending kids abroad were still pandemic related. So here, that's why we set up this question, and we can see most of the students and the parents, they said that they were no longer or less worried at the current stage. Well, of course, some of the students said that they have never been concerned about it, and also the ratio is much higher than the parents. According to the data of the Ministry of Education in China, and about 80% of the students will return back to China for employment and after graduation abroad. So we also asked the questions about the plans of students and parents after graduation. During our survey this month, with the implementation of the new policy, and we can see over here, about 1/3 of the students, they have changed their plans after graduation. And we also showed a tendency of students who changed their plans, and we can see that 10% of the students will stay abroad for further study right now. And 18% in total, they are planning to return to China for employment or for further study right now. Of course, majority hasn't changed their mind, and over 30%, they will choose to come back to China for employment anyway. As for the parents, there are also 1/3 of them have changed their plans for their kids, and over 20% will let their kids to stay abroad for further study, either in the same or in different destination right now. And the release of the new policy here we can see has also had a significant impact on the long-term plans of different level of students. Well, lastly, as mentioned before, the online program certificate will no longer be recognized in China. And we can see most of students, they consider that the new policy has no influence on them at all. And although 24% expressed that they would prefer to have it as a second option, only 7% of students said their plans had been affected by the policy, and now they had to go back to campus, they have to travel abroad. And it's really important for institutions to support the students in many ways for them to get back to the campus as soon as possible. I hope you find our results of the recent survey are helpful and represent the trend of the development in both sectors in China market. And I will pass back to Igor for the key takeaways and also the recommendations. So over to you, Igor.
Thank you, Grace. And you can probably control the slides, just move to the conclusion page. I hope Grace's part was helpful as we are nearing our mark. I will try to summarize. China remains the largest market for most of the destinations, and it will probably remain so for the foreseeable future. We probably haven't seen the peak of demand yet, and these recent changes should only enable Chinese students or encourage Chinese students to return. The period of online programs as such for Chinese students, so certain temporary solution because of the regulations, that's probably over. On the other hand, number of Chinese students is most likely going to increase, as it is also showing from the survey that we just did with the participants. People are already starting to notice an uptick in the demand, so activity is resuming. The traditional destinations have gained out of this sort of recent changes. Now they are again accessible for Chinese students, so that's a signal for educators there. But on the other hand, those who are in non-mainstream destinations, either in Asia or in Europe, they are seeing their destinations grow increasingly because of the competitiveness of the tuition fees, proximity, and these sort of new educational hubs that are growing for Chinese students will increasingly compete. The countries will most likely remain on their curves. So Australia should see sort of increase. UK most likely will maintain the market share. Australia should, US should see a recovery. In Canada will probably maintain the numbers, even though there will be more competition between the two. So Australia, Canada. Students are resuming their plans to study abroad, so they are no longer as concerned about the study and sort of this associated difficulties. And the quality of education will be really important. And to tie it into certain recommendations, if you could, Grace, move us further. The market is resuming activity. That's what we see in China on the ground. So there are increasingly B2B fairs happening. Agents are starting to become more active, and they still represent the major source of bookings. So as you could see, the travel should be already available. It is definitely worth to explore to apply for travel permits to China. Probably educators from Europe and Australia have a bit of advantage as they can make it for reasonable cost back to the market even before summer. Educators in North America, probably it's worth to wait a little bit for the fall recruitment season, unless you have very generous budgets, but the prices should get down inevitably. So by the end of the year, the travel should be reasonably resuming, and we should see more activity. And this is the time to plan for it in the budgets, in the travel plans, in the schedules, in order to return to the market and sort of start resuming activity, partnerships, and so on. What's really is important to understand is how focused Chinese students are on the employability prospects. So the drive to secure jobs in increasingly competitive job market in China, those stimuli from local authorities driving them to the top tier 1 or new tier 1 cities, that should be factored in when designing programs for Chinese students. So those programs need to address the market needs of students who are going back to China, not students who are looking to stay, because majority won't. Majority will return and they will compete in the domestic job market. For K-12, we should see a recovery in mobility for juniors. The safety and reputation of the schools are really important, as you heard from Grace. The word of mouth and personal referrals are very strong decision-making factors. So it should be factored in sort of recruitment strategy and the communication strategy of educators. But these are some of the probably imminent takeaways. There is definitely more to dig into. We would be happy. And if you can, Grace, sort of continue. There is opportunity to stay on top of developments, either through the services that we offer. You can contact us regarding market research, facilitation of partnerships, digital and marketing, and social media. So these are some of the things how we can assist. There is other complementary services that we offer, such as Market Monitor. If you could, Grace, to go to the page so that people can look how it looks. And there is also opportunity to sign up and stay on top of most relevant industry developments. This is complimentary service, so feel free to sign up and you will be on top of most major industry developments every day. And we are available for any contacts or questions to follow up. Obviously, we continue to monitor the market. The next presentation will be focused on agents. As you know, every year we issue an annual agent market update. So this time we will be serving agents about these recent changes and how they see the recent changes materialize and hopefully increase demand for study abroad that they could cater with. So that will be an interesting topic to look at in a couple of months from now. But perhaps to the questions, as we still have a few minutes. Grace, do you see anything that we should clarify from among the questions asked?
Yes. Well, of course, due to the time limit, probably we couldn't answer all the questions over here, but we'll be happy if if you prefer to reach out to us, and we will be happy to provide all the assistance and answer any questions. And I have seen some questions about the vocational colleges, and I think this is probably rather, well, instead of new topics, but probably some topics that attract a lot of attention right now, especially from our government. And when we see vocational here, indeed, we mean the vocational colleges. And even though that right now the government policies in favor of the vocational college development, but there's still a long way to go for students and parents to change their minds, to encourage the students to join such kind of programs. But of course, the assistant is also available, and we believe to connect with the Chinese colleges and to develop some joint programs overseas and China would be also beneficial. And some Chinese colleges probably have less opportunities compared to those higher ranked Chinese universities, to cooperate with the overseas institutions, and I believe they will be really happy to have such chances and to talk with more overseas institutions. And besides the vocational education, and also I'm seeing some questions regarding the online programs. And probably a little bit more explanation over here. And right now, indeed, the government is encouraging the students to back to the campus and travel abroad as soon as possible. So that's why the new policy is released. And from the current semesters, all the previous online study and also the degrees that received for those online studies will be now recognized. And as for hybrid and also the purely online corporate training programs, the Ministry of Education, they used to have a certain range of the programs or certificate or the degree that they would recognize. So for those which wasn't in that range, are still not recognized by the Ministry of Education, but the policies only apply to the undergraduate and also graduate degree programs, which needed the recognition of the Ministry of the Education. Well, probably for more relative questions about that, and there are detailed explanations from the Ministry of Education. But meanwhile, we'll be happy to answer more about that. Yeah.
Thank you, Grace. Obviously, we would be very glad to answer more questions, but we want to respect everybody's time and your time. I know it's probably past midnight for you at this point. So thank you, everybody. Like we said, it will be available on recording, so you can share with your colleagues for further context. The slides are available as well, so feel free to reach out, and we will also circulate the information back to you. We will be also happy to follow up individually on the questions that we couldn't answer within the time limit. So there is no question in vain here, and it will be good to have further conversations on some of those things in the vocational, in the recovery of the ELT programs as well, and further market opportunities. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate, and it only encourages us to bring relevant and regular market news from China for you. So stay tuned. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.